If I were to ask you this afternoon, which of the Ten Commandments you think is broken most often, I suspect that most of you would respond without hesitation, the sixth commandment. You know, the commandment that has to do with adultery and sins of sex. Now, that would be a pretty good answer. I mean, we do live in a loose society that has few, if any, morals. This picture kind of says it all. Sex workers publicly demonstrating for their rights, identifying them with human rights. But what I would say to you is, what about the first commandment? Where God says this to us, I am the Lord your God, and you shall have no God in your life except me. Think about it for a moment. Think of all of the things that people worship in life in place of God. Power, fame, money, popularity, pleasure, comfort, possessions, those are just a few of them. I mean, when you think about it, it would seem that the first commandment is broken at least as often as the sixth commandment, and maybe more often. But let me give you my personal choice for the commandment that is violated most often, and my choice for that is the seventh commandment. You shall not steal. It is the commandment, really, that is at stake in this afternoon's first reading. There we meet the prophet Amos, who lived about 750 years before Christ. He takes to task the people of his time for their cheating ways. It was a time in Israel's history when the people didn't care much about God or faith or religion. All they cared about was getting ahead in life and making a buck. And if that meant, cheating other people and taking from the poor what little they had, well, then so be it. The words at the end of the first reading that God speaks are chilling. Addressing such people, here's what God says to them: never will I forget one thing that you have done. You see, this business of cheating others and abusing the poor is very serious business with God. It's a message that we would all do well to take to heart, because you see, we live in a time and a society very much like that in which the prophet Amos lived. I mean, here we are, a little less than 2,780 years after Amos, and we see the same stuff happening right here in our country, among the powerful and the influential, just like in Amos's day. People that we have elected to serve us in public office, and instead they are fleecing us. You shall not steal. Let me give you a few examples. And this list could be far longer, but in the interest of a short homily, just a couple of examples. Congressman Charlie Rangel, accused of tax evasion, among other things, and he is facing a trial in the House of Representatives. There is Congresswoman Maxine Walters, who is accused of using her influence to help out a bank in which her husband has stock and sits on the board of directors. But let me tell you the best one of all. Timothy Geithner, our Secretary of the Treasury for this country, who failed to pay all of his taxes. Here's the thing. That was known prior to his confirmation as the United States Secretary of the Treasury, and our Senate still approved him and confirmed him. You know what? These are crimes for which you and I would end up in jail. And they maintain their government positions. But worst of all was the near collapse of our economy over a year ago. Millions of citizens lost their jobs and their houses. Many saw their retirement savings cut in half or wiped away entirely, while banks and financial institutions who were responsible for the crisis were bailed out. I want you to think about that because, really, the injustice of that is overwhelming. I mean, ordinary folks, tax-paying folks, lose what they have and then are called upon to bail out the rich and the powerful, the institutions that caused the problem. Is it any wonder that there is such anger in this country? Let's understand what the issue is. And it has everything to do with the seventh commandment. You shall not steal. And that applies not just to individuals, but it applies to financial institutions and to governments. You shall not steal, God says. But when it comes to the seventh commandment, we have to understand that there are more important things that we can take from people than their money and their material possessions. I mean, we can rob them of their dignity and their good reputations and their good name and their good standing in the community. We can do that simply by the way we use our tongues, or perhaps more accurately, the way we misuse our tongues. But on this religious education and baptism Sunday, we are being reminded that the worst violation of the seventh commandment, the worst thievery of all, is when we rob our children of the faith by failing to raise them in it. In this regard, there are two things I want to say to all parents who are gathered here this afternoon. And the first is this. On the day of your marriage, just before you spoke your vows, this question was put to you. You were asked by the priest who was presiding at your wedding, will you accept children lovingly from God and bring them up according to the law of Christ and His church? And you said, yes. And when you brought your children to the church to be baptized, like Dawn and Howard have done today, the same question was put to you that was put to them. You have asked to have your child baptized. In doing so, you are accepting the responsibility of training him or her in the faith. Do you clearly understand the responsibility that you are undertaking? And you said yes. Those are the two most sacred promises, or at least among the two most sacred promises that you have made to God. And they are promises, I assure you, for which He will hold you accountable at the end of your life. There's almost nothing more important. In fact, I can't think of anything right now more important for you as parents than to raise your child in the faith. In this afternoon's liturgy, we are being reminded of the importance of the seventh commandment: you shall not steal. We are being reminded that it is bad enough when we take other people's stuff. But what is infinitely worse is when we rob our children of the faith by not forming them in it. That, in God's eyes, is criminal and nearly unforgivable, because we are putting at risk the salvation of our own children, who are His children as well. God bless you.